What problems do we face in the West when we're now having to deal with a giant increase in the demography of believers who follow what they consider to be the Word of God, while always being able to claim, "You just don't understand the text," if any critique is directed at Islam or its holiest of scriptures? It's an unbelievably convenient situation for the pious, true meaning being lost in translation is a godsend for any cult following, and in fact tends to be the first introduction to the indoctrination of thought. Create an in-group of followers and an out-group of society as a whole by claiming our ignorance and maybe even throwing in a tint of dehumanization.
But the word that describes all of them, because people of the book is only for Christians and Jews, is kafir. The meaning of the Arabic word, kafir, and that is the Arabic word, means one who conceals. Kafir also means someone who is not grateful. That is, I'm not grateful for the bountifulness of Allah, and I'm not grateful for Muhammad. The word kafir is used so much that I've put together some statistics about it. The Quran devotes 64% of its text to the kafir, the unbeliever. Now here's the thing. Allah hates the kafir. Let me read you a verse. This is Quran 40:35. They, kafirs, who dispute the signs are the verses of the Quran, of Allah without authority having reached them, are greatly hated by Allah and the believers. So Allah hates me, but notice something else. Muslims hate me. As a matter of fact, there are 13 verses in the Quran which say that Muslims are not the friend of kafirs. So that's how bad a kafir is.
Well, what do I mean with all this? I mean that the result of this dialogue regarding Islam and the Quran's translation is that we who do not speak or read Arabic will be the involuntary students of those who do, while still being unable to accurately question claims sprouted from their holy book. You create a dialogue that is extremely fluid, vague, and generous towards the preacher, but is dangerous to the listener, and in a way actually makes us submit to Islam through our very efforts to understand. I time and time again get baffled by progressive Westerners who claim understanding of Islam, this religion of peace, and then tells the rest of us to drop our guards and instead hold hands. How do they come to this conclusion? I must have missed the memo. Me being the hateful cynic that I apparently am, see only oppression, hatred, and ignorance coming from the Quran, but using the opposition's argument, I am and forever will be unable to critique the text, and therefore I am equally ignorant in my scrutiny of whipping rape victims, hanging homosexuals, and calling for the death of the apostate. Am I wrong in being hostile towards thoughts and ideas which shy away from light and view skepticism only as an insult and a threat? But few texts are so empowered through being incomprehensible as the Quran. The practice of political violence encouraged by growling imams could very well be completely acceptable because we face a text which is embraced by those who, like no other faith, are ready to sacrifice everything in order to obey its laws. So what is the law? Well, that also seems to have been lost in translation. Sally Kuhn, who is an essayist and a political commentator at CNN, in August this year wrote this tweet, which in my view functions as the perfect example of what this type of dangerous gullibility regarding the dogma which are being preached results in. What makes it even worse is the fact that Miss Kuhn is a very outspoken lesbian, so as a gay woman she still considers it to be completely logically sound to defend a set of laws which if followed to the letter would have her killed, or at the very best have her whipped 80 times while the public watch. I don't understand this. She claims that there are just way too many different interpretations of Sharia in order for us to condemn it. She claims that what she calls progressive Muslims in need of our Western support are in favor of Sharia. I wonder what her views are regarding crimes which under Sharia law are considered to be crimes against Allah himself, as most often when reading about religions they're sadly primarily written by the extremely pious, ergo resulting in terribly partisan facts being presented. But while I have for a while now been reading about Islamic law, the upfront defense of these disgusting and primitive punishments is, as far as I've seen, that they're extremely rarely enforced. Except for in Saudi Arabia, of course, and Sudan, Iran, Afghanistan, and a couple of other countries, but except for these countries, these laws which defend Allah against insult by whipping rape victims, decapitating limbs, and stoning people are very rare. How comforting. Sharia law, as with Islam in general at this point in history, gets a pass from progressives due to them having been preached to about the diverse and vast amount of sources from which upon Sharia law takes inspiration in order to diversify the pain and the suffering they distribute upon its victims. So reinforcing this journey upon the path to follow God's law is to be defending laws that demands the murders of homosexuals and the hunting down and killing of those who leave this religion of peace. No matter all of your fluff talk, Miss Kuhn, Sharia still primarily rests upon the Quran followed by the Sunnah. This is the very same Sunnah in which Muhammad tells a man who just murdered a slave he owned while she was pregnant by stabbing her and the living child inside of her, that because she insulted Muhammad she shall have no vengeance paid upon her life. There you have the moral compass upon which Sharia law rests. The moral compass of a man who approved the murder of a pregnant slave and her unborn child just for the crime of insulting him. There you have the justice system which progressives in the West defend through their ignorance and their naivete. I'm going to leave Miss Kuhn alone now. I just hope I've made myself clear to you about what I'm trying to say. I just more or less every day struggle to grasp how people can warp what is obvious to the point that she has. And she is far, far, far from alone in doing this. But I probably have misunderstood it all. That very often seems to be the reply you get as a Westerner when you find something that is morally reprehensible within their holy texts. Perhaps it's my fault. It might be my fault. Or that it's all something that is being lost in translation, that is all just a victim of semantics. Because with translating the Quran, linguists are facing several issues regarding everything from how to properly translate metaphors, grammatical tense, and where words have several different meanings, yet meanings that are closely related to each other. With all this in mind, will we ever be able to reach a point where Muslims and their holy scriptures will no longer be able to throw out its lifesaver, that the true meaning has been lost in translation? We live today in a time and a society where highly partisan agents are the lone translators of this religion, political ideology, and to put it frankly, safety problem. A problem which is making its presence even more known in the West. I'm sorry, but in my opinion, progressive Muslims cannot save the rotten core of an infallible dogmatic set of beliefs which pardon infanticide, genocide, rape, and slavery. And I still fear that this convenient excuse will remain well used and that progressives will make sure to keep it easily accessible, the excuse of true meaning being lost in translation. Because when you are in the situation that Muslims in the West are today, where you have the right to demand respect and tolerance, yet are immune to demands and critique in return, you don't give that away easily. I read this quote a couple of years ago, and it really got stuck in my head. The purest form of evil is to take what is obvious and make it abstract. I have no clue who said it, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately.
Now, the motion before you tonight is asking you to determine whether Islam is a religion of peace. And at first blush, that might seem a bit tricky to decide. After all, the Quran and the Hadith have verses in them that point to peace and justice and love. But there are other verses that are about violence against specific people. So how then do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory verses? How then do we decide whether Islam is a religion of peace? The only way to answer that question is to take an honest look at the people who practice the faith and how they interpret it.